In the bustling, cobblestone heart of the ancient city of Lithera, where the echoes of horse-drawn carriages mingled with the soft murmur of traders hawking their wares, and the sweet aroma of baked bread wafted through the air, the atmosphere was thick with anticipation. The narrow, shadowy alleys, lined with aging stone buildings that seemed to lean inwards as if eavesdropping, held within them the whispers of justice and injustice. Here, stories of noble deeds and unspeakable wrongs collided in a ceaseless dance, each tale threading through the lives of the city's inhabitants like the intricate patterns of a tapestry. At the heart of this vibrant urban fabric, the grand courthouse loomed proudly, its imposing structure a testament to the ideals of law and order. Crafted from local granite and adorned with elaborate carvings of scales and scrolls, the courthouse stood tall, its arched windows flickering with the warm glow of candlelight. It was a bastion of the law, a place where destinies were shaped, futures decided, and the weight of truth was measured against the shadows of deceit. Within its hallowed chambers, the air was charged with a sense of solemnity and purpose. The walls, steeped in history, seemed to echo the voices of judges long past, their declarations of justice ringing out like a clarion call. As the sun dipped low on the horizon, casting long shadows across the polished wooden floor, a peculiar tale was poised to unfold, drawing in all whose lives it would inevitably touch. The inhabitants of Lithera, from the noble courtiers to the humble street vendors, held their breath in collective anticipation, unaware that the events of this day would leave an indelible mark on the very fabric of their lives and their beloved city. Enter Judge Alabaster McWright, a man whose very presence commanded attention, with a demeanor as rigid and imposing as the iron bars that lined the windows of the courtroom, casting long shadows on the floor. His reputation was as unyielding as the hard steel itself, striking fear in the hearts of many who found themselves at the mercy of his gavel. In the small town, his name had become almost synonymous with the word prejudice, a term that echoed in hushed conversations among residents, particularly within the melanated community. The townspeople often exchanged knowing glances and murmurs when his name was mentioned, as they recalled the countless cases that had unfolded under his watchful eye. Cases that often had outcomes that seemed predetermined by the color of one's skin. Whispers of injustice fluttered through the streets like specters, haunting those who sought fairness in a system that felt heavily weighted against them. Judge McWright's eyes, a stark and chilling shade of blue reminiscent of a frigid winter sky, were perhaps his most telling feature. These icy orbs rarely softened, often harboring a glint of disdain directed toward those who dared to stand before him, particularly individuals whose skin bore the kiss of the sun, the vibrant hues of a rich and diverse heritage. His gaze could pierce through the facades people wore, revealing what he deemed shortcomings or faults with an unerring precision that left many disheartened. His courtroom was a battleground where the scales of justice seemed perpetually tipped, loaded against those who already faced societal biases and stereotypes. The atmosphere crackled with tension as defendants, often from marginalized backgrounds, entered under the weight of systemic prejudice, feeling the oppressive atmosphere that Judge McWright had cultivated over the years. In this realm, the words of the law were wielded like weapons, and for many, they found themselves on the wrong side of a justice that felt more like a mockery than a means of support. In the eyes of those who had experienced his judgments, he was not merely a man in a black robe, but a harbinger of an unrelenting system, one that reinforced barriers rather than breaking them down. The name of Judge Alabaster McWright became a symbol of an unyielding legacy, a reminder of the struggles faced by so many who yearned for equality in the face of overwhelming hostility. On this fateful day, a young woman named Shara walked through the heavy oak doors, the sound of the creaking wood echoing in the stillness of the grand hallway. The imposing entrance seemed to symbolize the weight of the occasion, casting a shadow over her spirits as she stepped inside. Shara, a name that rolled off the tongue like a gentle summer breeze, carried an air of grace that was both captivating and serene. She was dressed in a simple yet elegant ensemble, a soft lavender blouse that contrasted beautifully with her dark jeans and delicate silver earrings that glimmered softly in the muted light of the room. As she made her way further into the building, she felt a flutter of apprehension in her stomach. Shara had been summoned for a minor traffic infraction, an oversight on her part that had led to an unfortunate encounter with the local law enforcement. There was something almost surreal about being here, standing in the midst of what felt like a world governed by rules and regulations, a world far removed from her usual life, filled with laughter and creativity. Little did she know, however, that fate had a different plan for her. The air was thick with tension as she approached the reception desk, her heart beating a steady rhythm against her rib cage. She glanced around the room, taking in the serious faces of the other individuals waiting for their own turn in front of the judge. Stories of their lives swirled through her mind, the shopkeeper wrestling with financial struggles, the college student battling a streak of bad luck, that human element that made each of them unique, yet so strangely familiar. Shara took a deep breath, trying to calm her nerves. At that moment, she felt a strange sense of vulnerability mixed with a flicker of curiosity. What other stories would unfold today? What unforeseen twists awaited her? Perhaps this minor inconvenience would lead to something greater, something that would reshape the very trajectory of her life. After what felt like an eternity, her name was finally called. She stepped forward, her resolve strengthening with each stride. As she stood in front of the judge, the weight of the moment pressed down on her. Unbeknownst to her, this day, which had begun so mundanely, would unfold into an extraordinary chapter filled with unexpected encounters, choices that would shape her future, and revelations that would challenge her understanding of fate. Little did Shara know that this mishap was merely the beginning of a journey that would redefine her life forever. Judge McWright took one look at her and sneered, a dismissive curl of his lips that spoke volumes. He had seen her kind before, women who dared to stand tall, defiant in the face of authority, unyielding against the pressures that sought to bend them. To him, they were a peculiar breed, often misunderstood, but to his twisted perception, simply disrespectful. It was as if they wore their courage like armor, which only served to aggravate him further. He cleared his throat, the sound reverberating ominously throughout the courtroom, a rough, gravelly noise that hung in the air like the toll of a funeral bell, signaling the gravity of the moment. All eyes in the room turned toward him, and the atmosphere thickened with a palpable tension. With an authoritative lean forward, he demanded, "State your name and the reason for your presence," he bellowed, his voice booming against the walls as if he were a thunderclap in a quiet storm. This was no ordinary proceeding. It was a battle of wills, a clash between an indomitable spirit and a man determined to maintain control at all costs. Her voice, a captivating blend of velvet softness and steely resolve, echoed through the crowded courtroom as she spoke. "Your Honor, I am Shara Ebenflower," she announced with a confidence that commanded attention. "I am here today regarding a traffic violation." The room fell silent, all eyes drawn towards her as she stood before the bench, a figure of poise amidst the formality of the judicial setting. The judge, a stern man with a weathered face and deep-set eyes, barely spared a glance at the stack of paperwork before him. Instead, he fixed his gaze on Jara, assessing her with an intensity that could easily unsettle a lesser individual. With a rhythmic tap of his gavel against the polished wood of the bench, he delivered his verdict with a tone devoid of sympathy. "Guilty," he pronouncing the word as if it carried the weight of the world. The sound of the gavel striking again punctuated his statement, effectively sealing her fate without a hint of remorse. "You will pay a fine of 500 gold coins," he continued, his voice firm and unwavering, as if reciting a line from a script that had been etched into his memory. The judge seemed entirely uninterested in the details of her case, dismissing any possible explanations or mitigating circumstances with a wave of his hand. "Next case," he called out, his gaze already shifting to the next person waiting in line. In that fleeting moment, Shara felt a mixture of frustration and disbelief surge through her. It seemed as though the judge had not even considered her plea or the circumstances surrounding her violation. Yet she held her head high, a glimmer of determination shining in her eyes. Despite the harshness of the ruling, she vowed to find a way to ensure that her voice, that blend of velvet and steel, would be heard once again in this unforgiving hall of justice. Shara's eyes narrowed, and an unsettling tension filled the air, making the room feel suffocatingly small. The walls seemed to close in around her as the weight of the situation pressed heavily upon her shoulders. The judge's gavel had already struck down harshly once, sealing her fate with a fine that was not just steep but astronomical, a blatant reflection of the judge's inherent bias against her. Shara was no stranger to the law. In fact, she had always prided herself on her deep understanding of legal intricacies, nuances, and loopholes that others often overlooked. But today was different. Today she felt cornered, yet she carried with her a secret weapon, an ace tucked away safely, carefully hidden up her sleeve. Taking a deep breath to steady her racing heart, she gathered her thoughts and readied herself for the confrontation she knew was brewing. With a steady hand, she smoothed the fabric of her skirt and prepared to address the judge, determination flashing in her keen eyes. "Your Honor," she began, her tone deliberate and carefully measured, "I believe there has been a misunderstanding." Her voice, though calm, held an underlying current of urgency that was palpable in the tense atmosphere of the courtroom. The judge, an imposing figure cloaked in his judicial robes, looked up at her, his expression hardened with impatience. His thick eyebrows knitted together in annoyance, creating a deep furrow on his brow. "Speak your piece, woman, and be quick about it," he snapped, his tone sharp and unyielding, as though he held complete dominion over the proceedings. Jara took a moment to gather her composure, feeling the eyes of the gallery upon her, a mixture of curiosity and judgment. She understood that this was her chance, a pivotal moment that could either solidify her fate or grant her the reprieve she so desperately sought. With newfound resolve igniting within her, she straightened up, ready to reveal not just her argument, but also the hidden strength she possessed, one that could potentially turn the tide of the situation in her favor. She needed to act swiftly and decisively, for the eyes of justice, and indeed her future, were upon her. "I am Professor Jara Ebenflower of the Lithera School of Law," she announced, her voice resonating with a newfound authority that pierced through the restless murmurs of the onlookers who had gathered in the courtroom. The words seemed to hold a weight of their own, commanding immediate respect and attention. As her declaration hung in the air, the atmosphere shifted, palpable anticipation filling the room as if everyone instinctively understood the significance of the moment. "I taught you criminal procedure," she continued, her tone sharpening like the edge of a blade. "And I dare say you've forgotten the lesson on proportionality." With each word, she accentuated the gravity of her statement, drawing attention to the essential principle that governed the very essence of justice and fairness. The concept of proportionality, that the response to a crime should align with the severity of the offense, had been a cornerstone of her lectures. Now it echoed ominously in the courtroom, a reminder of the standards that should guide the judicial process. The color drained from Judge McWright's face as he absorbed her words, his pulse quickening. His eyes widened in disbelief, and all at once, the reality of the moment crashed down on him. He recognized the name, Professor Jara Ebenflower. It was the very same name that had been etched into his brain during countless hours of rigorous study and stern lectures. Her teachings had not only filled textbooks, but had also become the foundation of his legal reasoning and ethical framework. Memories rushed back to him. Late nights poring over case laws, endless notes on legal principles, and the unyielding standards she had imparted. He vividly recalled her classroom, where she had commanded respect with her rigorous approach and passionate debates. The way her eyes lit up when discussing pivotal cases, the depth of her knowledge, and her unwavering commitment to justice had shaped his understanding of the law. She had been a formidable mentor, challenging him to think critically and to always weigh the scales of justice fairly. Now, standing before him in the courtroom, unmistakably powerful and poised, she was a living embodiment of the ideals she had instilled in him. In that instant, the stakes of the trial intensified. Judge McWright felt the weight of his responsibility like never before. Here was a woman who had laid the groundwork for his legal career, standing as a reminder of what was truly at stake. Her presence challenged him, urging him to apply the principles she had taught with diligence and courage. It was not just a matter of right and wrong. It was an opportunity to uphold the integrity of the judicial system. The eyes of the spectators, once filled with idle curiosity, now reflected a deep sense of expectation, for they all understood the gravity of the exchange unfolding in this hallowed space. In this moment, the past collided with the present, and Judge McWright knew that he had to rise to the occasion, to honor the lessons he had learned under her tutelage. "Ye your Professor Ebenflower," he stammered, his voice cracking under the weight of disbelief. The gavel slipped from his hand, clattering loudly against the polished wooden surface of the bench, a jarring sound that resonated through the otherwise hushed courtroom. The clang echoed, a stark interruption to the tense atmosphere that enveloped everyone in attendance. Jara stood before him, calm and unattached, her features serene but resolute. She met Judge McWright's bewildered gaze with a composed expression that was difficult to decipher, masking any hint of her inner thoughts. "Indeed I am," she affirmed, her tone cool yet assertive, infusing her words with the authority of someone who had navigated these murky waters before. "And it appears, Judge McWright, that you have forgotten the very principles we discussed. A fine must fit the crime, not the color of one's skin." As she spoke, the weight of her statement hung heavily in the air, each word a deliberate strike against the pervasive injustices that plagued their system. The courtroom, a space meant for justice, now felt like a stage for an uncomfortable confrontation, its occupants hanging on her words as if they were the only lifeline in a stormy sea of prejudice and bias. The tension was palpable. It felt as if time itself had come to a standstill, and everyone was caught in a shared moment of collective realization. The judge's face turned a deep shade of crimson, a stark contrast to the pale walls that surrounded them, as he comprehended the magnitude of his blunder. An overwhelming embarrassment settled over him, forcing him to confront the truth he had momentarily overlooked. He fumbled through his thoughts, words tumbling out in a desperate attempt to articulate a justification for his previous decisions, but the coherence of his argument slipped through his fingers like sand. Despite his mounting confusion, Jara's unwavering gaze pierced through his fumbling excuses, her conviction unrelenting. It was clear that she was not merely addressing a mistake. She was challenging a systemic issue that extended far beyond the courtroom's confines, shining a light on the biases that too often dictated the administration of justice. Each pair of eyes in the room reflected a different emotion: shock, contemplation, and a flicker of hope, recognizing that perhaps, just perhaps, this moment could mark the beginning of meaningful change. "Your Honor," she continued, her voice steady yet laced with an undercurrent of indignation, "I suggest we review the case and perhaps your understanding of the law." The weight of her words hung in the air, a challenge that reverberated throughout the courtroom, urging those present to reconsider their preconceived notions. The story of Judge McWright and Professor Ebenflower had only just begun, a tale that would resonate through the annals of Lithera's legal history. The clank of the gavel was the first note in a symphony of revelation and retribution, an overture that would usher in an era of discussion and advocacy. It served as a poignant reminder that even the most entrenched walls of prejudice could crumble before the unwavering power of truth and knowledge. It was a call to arms, an echoing plea against the insidious nature of ignorance that can so easily ensnare even those in positions of authority. Judge McWright's heart hammered in his chest like a blacksmith's anvil, the rhythmic pounding a stark contrast to the silence enveloping the courtroom. His thoughts raced as fast as a quicksilver steed across the vast Elorian plains, each one colliding with the other in a turbulent whirlwind of disbelief and realization. The young black woman standing before him had ignited something within him, something he had buried deep beneath layers of convention and bias. He had underestimated her, seeing only the rich cocoa of her skin, a superficial characteristic that obscured the sharp intellect and fierce determination that lay beneath the surface. As she anchored her gaze into his, he could sense the depth of her conviction. It was as if she were not merely fighting for the case at hand, but for an entire generation, a chorus of voices that had long been silenced in the shadow of systemic inequality. Her arguments cut through the fog of his prejudgment like a blade, each point crafted with precision, revealing laborious research and profound insight into the law he had once held as infallible. In that moment, an unexpected wave of humility washed over Judge McWright. He recognized the enormity of his error, how his position of authority had led him to overlook the very essence of justice he had sworn to uphold. With each second that ticked by, it became increasingly clear that this moment was not just a turning point for her, but for him as well. It was a revelation, a clarion call to evolve, not just as a judge, but as a human being. As the murmurs of the spectators grew, a palpable tension filled the atmosphere of the courtroom. What had initially seemed like a mundane day in the halls of justice now thrummed with a newfound energy. Judge McWright could feel the scrutiny of those around him. Their expectations loomed large, a veil of anticipation draped over the proceedings. He was not just an arbiter of the law in this instance. He took on the role of a witness, a participant in a moment that would shape his understanding of justice. And so began the journey of Judge McWright and Professor Ebenflower, a journey that would dismantle old paradigms and foster new discourses, challenging the very fabric of what had been deemed acceptable in the legal realm. Together, they would venture into the heart of the law, unraveling its complexities and revisiting its principles, navigating a landscape where wisdom and humility could flourish, paving the way for truth and equity to reign supreme. But I, he stuttered, his words tangling in the web of his own ignorance. The courtroom, once a bastion of his power, now felt like the cramped quarters of a dwarf's mine, oppressive and stifling. Each face around him reflected disbelief, their eyes wide as they absorbed the magnitude of his predicament, the weight of judgment pressing heavily against him. It was as if the walls themselves were closing in, echoing the truths he could no longer deny, suffocating him in their stern silence. Professor Ebenflower stepped closer to the bench, her presence commanding as she moved with purpose, her cape billowing like a storm cloud. Her eyes pierced through the veil of his arrogance, and she regarded him with a blend of pity and resolve. "Judge McWright," she began, her voice steady and resonant, "the law is not a plaything to be wielded with malice. It is a tool to protect and serve all citizens of Lithera, regardless of their heritage or hue." Her words cut through the tension in the room, each syllable a note in a symphony of justice that crescendoed powerfully against the backdrop of McWright's hubris. The atmosphere thickened with intensity as she continued. "It is your duty, as a judge, to uphold this principle, to embody fairness, and not let your biases strip others of their dignity. This court is a sanctuary, a letter of the law, and it must reflect the diverse fabric of our community." Her gaze was unwavering, challenging him to confront the reality he had so carelessly dismissed. The room, once a sea of murmurs, was now a desert of quiet. The only sound the occasional rustle of parchment as the court scribe diligently took note of the unfolding drama. The tension was palpable, a taut string ready to snap at the smallest provocation. McWright's face flushed a deep crimson, and all around, the spectators were held in rapt attention, their breaths collectively suspended in anticipation of his response. Would he rise to the occasion, shake off the shackles of his own prejudices, or would he stubbornly cling to the remnants of his authority, determined to silence the voice of reason that had dared to challenge him? The question hung in the air like a storm cloud, prompting unsaid prayers for justice to prevail amidst the looming shadows of doubt. I did not mean to," the judge attempted to elucidate, his voice fading into the atmosphere like the tail of a kite caught in the calmness of a still wind, drifting aimlessly, seeking something to anchor it back to reality. The room fell into a quiet tension, each gaze shifted toward him, as if awaiting the wisdom of a leader who suddenly found himself lost. Shara raised a hand, elegantly halting his uncertain flow of words, her gesture a harmonious blend of grace and authority that belied the steely resolve simmering beneath the surface. Her presence emanated confidence, a stance taken not just in defense of her own beliefs, but in fierce advocacy for the integrity of the law itself. "Meaning is not the same as intention, Judge," she declared, her voice clear and unwavering. "The law does not discriminate, and neither should its servants. each word was a hammer striking an anvil, solidifying her position with a clarity that echoed throughout the room. As she spoke, the air in the courtroom thickened with palpable anticipation, a collective inhalation, as if the very walls were holding their breath, bracing themselves for the critical juncture in this unfolding drama. The assemblage of onlookers leaned forward, their eyes wide, fully engaged in the moment, for they sensed that Jara was not merely making a statement, but igniting a deep conversation about fairness and justice. Finally, after what felt like an eternity suspended in time, the judge, McWright, found his voice again. He swallowed hard, a bead of sweat threatening to escape across his brow. "Professor," he finally managed to articulate, his tone low and hoarse, as if each syllable were a pebble being ejected from his throat. "I stand corrected." There was a weight to his admission, an acknowledgement of the truth that slithered through the air like a serpent, bold yet cautious. "Let us review the case together," he proposed, his voice regaining a hint of strength, "and perhaps learn from each other." In those words, there was not only a path to resolution, but also an opening for growth, a bridge that could connect their differing perspectives and foster a dialogue that might illuminate the complexities of justice, intent, and morality. The audience could sense the shift. The potential for transformation hung palpably in the air, inviting all to partake in the conversation that was yet to unfold. The crowd, a vivid mosaic of Lithera's diverse populace, exhaled a collective sigh of relief that resonated through the air like a gentle breeze after a storm. Their eyes sparkled with renewed hope, reflecting the flickering flames of possibility that burned brightly within their hearts. For in this pivotal moment, the scales of justice had finally begun to tremble, shifting ever so slightly, signaling that the long-awaited potential for balance and fairness was growing stronger amid a landscape previously marred by inequity and despair. Within the hallowed chambers of the courthouse, two figures stood bent over an ancient parchment, their expressions infused with a mix of determination and gravity, the soft golden light streaming through the intricately designed stained glass window above them cast a warm, ethereal glow that seemed to wrap around them like an embrace, marking the significance of what they were about to unveil. Outside, the cobblestone streets, rich with history and lined with the echoes of countless footsteps, whispered of impending change. As the news of the judge's earlier folly, a critical misjudgment that had shaken the very foundations of trust, began to circulate, a swell of excitement rippled through the community. What began as mere whispers grew into fervent murmurs that echoed through the air, igniting a spark of hope in the hearts of the citizens. Soon, the entire city buzzed with animated conversations and stories spread like wildfire, celebrating the remarkable courage and sharp intellect of Professor Ebenflower. They spoke of the professor's unwavering belief in justice and his clever tactics that had turned the tide in their favor. His name became synonymous with resilience, a beacon of inspiration that illuminated the path forward. As the two figures leaned closer together, the juxtaposition of their ages and experiences painted a striking portrait of unity in purpose. The judge, with his graying hair and furrowed brow that spoke volumes of the trials he had endured, stood alongside the professor, whose youthful exuberance and passionate spirit radiated with an infectious energy. Their heads bent in focused collaboration, a testament to their shared commitment to finding equitable resolutions. The walls around them, adorned with the faded remnants of past verdicts and historical judgments, seemed to come alive with shadows of their pasts. These shadows danced across the surfaces, whispering tales of the battles they had each fought, of victories and failures alike. Each lesson learned served as a stepping stone toward this very moment, forging a connection that transcended their differences. Together, they embodied the hope of a new dawn for Lithera, one where justice and equity could flourish hand in hand, creating a future promised to all. In the weeks that followed the landmark decision, the Grand Courthouse, an impressive structure that had stood for generations, underwent a profound and inspiring transformation. The once dominating whispers of injustice, which had echoed within its hallowed halls, began to dissipate, slowly replaced by the resonant sounds of fairness, equity, and mutual understanding. With each passing day, Judge McWright, now invigorated by a vision that had previously eluded him, found himself under the astute and watchful eye of Professor Ebenflower. Motivated by her wisdom and insight, he began to consider the deeper layers of each case before him. No longer delivering judgments based solely on the rigid parameters of the law, he infused his decisions with a newfound sense of empathy and compassion, recognizing the humanity of all those who stood before him. And what of Shara? Her journey was nothing short of remarkable. Emerging as a beacon of hope, she became a luminescent figure not only within the confines of the courtroom, but radiated throughout the entirety of Lithera. Once, her name had instilled a sense of fear and trepidation in the hearts of many, a stark reminder of a time marked by discord and disarray. Yet, through her resilience and dedication to justice, that same name blossomed into a symbol of transformative change. Her students at the School of Law, once intimidated by her formidable intellect, began to view her with newfound respect and admiration. They filled her classrooms with energetic discussions and passionate debates, inspired by her own fervor for justice and equity. The townspeople, who had once whispered her name in hushed tones of dread, now spoke of her with a mix of awe and admiration, inspired by her courage and unwavering commitment to the tenets of fairness. The intertwined stories of Judge McWright and Professor Ebenflower became a poignant lesson for all, an enduring reminder that even in the darkest and most formidable of places, light has the remarkable ability to shine through. As the seasons turned and soft breezes carried the whispers of the leaves through the air, the tale grew richer, winding its way through the city like the delicate vines that embraced the ancient stones of the courthouse, intertwining with the lives of those who walked its pathways. It became a narrative of growth, of humility, and of the profound power of knowledge to conquer even the most persistent beasts of bias and prejudice that had reigned for far too long. For in the very heart of Lithera, where the cobblestone streets intertwined with the majestic ivory towers of the law, justice began to transcend its former limitations. No longer blind, it was now imbued with the clear, discerning eyes of a woman, Jara, who had taught a man, Judge McWright, to see beyond mere appearances. Together, they fostered a new era, one in which fairness prevailed, understanding flourished, and the essence of justice was forever transformed, shining brightly for all to witness.